Welcome to Cosmic Scene with Jill Jardine. I'm your host, Jill Jardine, Master's in Counseling Psychology, professional astrologer, psychic healer, and yogi. In this episode, we explore the significance of the solstice and origins of Yuletide with my guest, Sarah Adams. The winter solstice is ushered in annually when the sun transits into the sign Capricorn. It is a return to the light in the northern hemisphere and the beginning of summer in the southern hemisphere. Stay tuned to see what Sarah has to share about this powerful time and how we can harness the light all year long. Hey listeners, I want to remind you to support Cosmic Scene with Jill Jardine podcast. You can do that by going on to www.buzzsprout.com/958528/support. This will be in the show notes. Welcome to the episode where we go back to our pagan roots to discover the significance of the solstice and healing energies available at Yuletide. My guest is Sarah Adams, bringing her witchy goddess knowledge to us so we can embrace the ancient earth festival and align with the divine feminine rising. Sarah Adams of Water and Earth Intuitive Consulting offers professional astrology as well as channeling, Reiki, and chakra work. She has been offering tarot and astrology readings since 2001. In addition to offering guidance to clients via private readings, parties, fundraisers, events, and workshops, Sarah is also a writer, marketing consultant, and event planner. Last but not least, Sarah is a mom. She lives with her 3 daughters in their home in Plymouth, Massachusetts, where they love to cook, do arts and crafts, garden, swim, and occasionally do family yoga. In her free time, she is training for her private pilot license to fly aircraft. Contact Sarah at Sarah, capital SARAH _ Adams, capital ADAMS at yahoo.com. And just a little backstory on the solstices. The solstices were celebrated by our ancestors for many reasons, notably as a license for sexual proclivities, encouraged at this time to bless the fertility and abundance of the earth. The solstices were a time of honoring the forces of order and light, the divine feminine and masculine, paying tribute to Mother Earth and Father Sun. Solstices were times to celebrate the polarities of bringing people of the planet in sync with the cycles of nature. The solstices and equinoxes, solar festivals, as well as the full moon, lunar festivals, were celebrated for bringing orderly rhythms to the earth, allowing her people an opportunity to harmonize these rhythms through ritual, dance, and festivity. The winter solstice has always been a time to pray for the return of order and light. The ancients knew that human beings exist in a much larger ecological and cosmic system and must abide by the rules of those systems if we are to survive. The solstices are ideal times to acknowledge and celebrate our responsibilities to these greater realms of being. We have remnants from the European winter solstice with our updated version of the ancient visitation of the solstice shaman, who we've renamed Santa Claus. And isn't it interesting that the winter solstice coincides with the Christian celebration of Christmas or Christmas? And now my guest, Sarah Adams, will tell us more about Yuletide and the winter solstice. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, Jill. I'm so glad to be here, especially at this cold, dark time of year to talk about ancient celebrations of light. So we're here to talk about the winter solstice. Astrologically, it's when the sun enters Capricorn, a cardinal sign, which signals the shifting of the seasons. Just like the sun entering Cancer signals the summer solstice, Capricorn is one of the cardinal signs. It's the opposite of Cancer, and it is the time of the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year and the longest night of the year. So solstices, as I mentioned, happen when the sun shifts into those cardinal signs, and it's basically sets the stage for the next quarter. For the next 3 months, what are the themes? And right now, in this time of darkness, with the solstice having the longest night and the shortest day, it is emphasizing the theme of the return of the sun. Because it's in winter that the ancient civilizations wondered, will the sun ever come back? Or are we going to die in this cold and darkness? So it was by understanding the seasons and the wheel of the year that they actually had hope, knowing that the sun would return. And I'm here today to talk about some history behind solstices and the celebration of light in these times of darkness.
That's wonderful. I'm sure people like to know the origins of this. The solstice is coming back. New Age communities have been celebrating it for years. They have the celebration at Stonehenge and other sacred sites, but it is an honoring of the earth and getting back to our roots, so to speak, and the tradition. So we'd love to hear the origins.
Sure, absolutely. And I just want to note before we time travel back into history, a theme which was reflected long ago and can still be embraced today by those acknowledging the winter solstice. When the sun goes into Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn, it's a time to think about and reflect on the last year and also what you want to master and build in the coming year because Capricorn is the master builder. And I think that this kind of thinking, I mean, Saturn also in ancient times would correlate to survival. I mean, structures like a roof over their head, for example, it was literally survival. So I think this was a practical type of thinking because it was the coldest, darkest, riskiest time of year for ancient civilizations to survive. So it was through regimen and discipline that they got through these hard, cold, dark times and literally thinking about, what is our food supply for the next 3 months. I mean, when they were visualizing for the next quarter, it was very, very tribal,
Right.
literal,
Right.
survival based.
Survival, root
Right.
chakra. So, and isn't it interesting that the Romans actually celebrated their Christmas called Saturnalia between what we know
December
as,
17th.
yeah,
Yeah.
around the solstice.
Yeah.
So there we go. Saturn was the lord of this time of year, even
Yes.
though it is the returning of the sun. But weirdly enough, in Vedic astrology, Saturn is the son of the sun.
Yeah.
So we have those two archetypes that are very masculine,
Right.
but the earth itself is an honoring of the feminine principle. So we'd like to hear what you say about
Sure,
that.
sure. So to go back in history, in times that were matriarchal and they were honoring the goddess, we talk about, so we've mentioned the winter solstice. The oldest festival and celebration of the solstice in the world that we know of is Yule. We have heard about Yule, we hear about it all the time. If you turn on the radio to traditional Christmas music, they're singing about Yuletide greetings and caroling, formerly known as wassailing. These all have pagan roots and even the Christmas tree. So let's talk about it. So Yule was a celebration of the return of light. It was a festival around fire, feasting. The feast would last until the Yule log burned out. Traditionally, Yule, we hear about the 12 days of Christmas, but traditionally it was actually the 12 days of Yule from December 21st to January 1st, New Year's. So we see these celebrations throughout history all around the world. The merriment, even like in Roman cultures around Saturnalia, there was debauchery, but it was always, whether how softcore or hardcore the celebrations were, it was always about celebrating light. There were candles, there were bonfires, which all morphed into Christmas lights and Christmas decorations. We still hear the term celebration of light used regularly during the holiday season. So in ancient Norse times, the festival was called Jol, Jol, or Jule, Juul. And that word is still used today. And
Very similar to Yule.
exactly, this word is still used today in Icelandic and Nordic countries in their language and talking about this time of year. And it actually is pronounced Yule. So things like the Yule log, the Christmas tree, wassailing, those all had Norse origins. And even wassailing and caroling, those origins can be traced back to Saturnalia, especially in Rome, as they were celebrating their winter festival for Saturn from December 17th on, they would run nude singing through the streets, and they'd run to their neighbors' homes and sing and say, come out and party and drink wine and be naked with us. But
Hail Saturn, Lord of
yes,
Karma.
yes. So little did we know, in our country with our Puritan roots that, as we're here in New England, we're recording from Massachusetts, as people are doing their Victorian caroling and, it's all so prim and proper. Caroling and wassailing actually has its roots back to ancient Rome and debauchery during Saturnalia. But, these festivals were all around the world. It's traced back, specifically Yule is traced back to the Norse and the Vikings. Ruler King Hakon Haraldsson, he was actually the first ruler to combine Yule with Christmas celebrations in the 10th century. But before him and after, it was being celebrated all over the world. Druids, there are writings about Druids gathering mistletoe.
How many years back was that? Before Christ, right?
Yeah, hundreds of years before Christ. And also, they would sacrifice white bulls, the Druids would specifically. And when we look from then and now, like the traditions that carried over, like the Christmas tree and caroling, and then the traditions that didn't carry over, like the sacrifice, it really comes down to human practicality. So they had livestock back then. Everybody had livestock. Everybody doesn't have livestock now. Not that we would want to sacrifice, but it's simply not practical. However, it wasn't just about sacrifice, to go back to the practicality. This is in the dead of winter. It's about survival, right? So in Europe, specifically Northern and Central Europe, wintertime was the time of famine. And it was actually easier to kill off some livestock, sacrifice them, have a festival around all that abundance of meat. That made more sense than for them to go hungry while feeding their cattle. So they would sacrifice cattle instead of feeding them all winter. And, that was part of the festivities with pagans, as you can see in any holiday. It went around a lot like the cycle of the season. Yes. So here we have the dark return of light, and also like food, especially agriculture, and when food was in abundance and when it wasn't.
So they'd have to store it up for the winter, what they did have, what they collected at the harvest. And then instead of having these animals survive and maybe get really thin because they weren't being fed over the winter months, they would take them at that time and do a sacrifice and thus provide food for the tribe or the group.
Exactly. There was a theme of death and rebirth anyways around this time. So they saw the darkness as a time of death, but then the theme of rebirth, which was actually happening with nature and the planets, was the return of light. Because after the 21st, the solstice, the darkest day of the year, the sun god is returning. Slowly, day by day, the days are getting longer.
So in the different traditions, there's different names for that sun god. I know Lu was like Lleu was like the Celtic, yes, or the Druidic god, and perhaps who would it have been? Thor in the Scandinavian tradition.
Yeah, and even this in a way cites back to ancient Egypt with the theme of Ra, the sun god, dying and rebirthing and returning. So it's kind of an ancient theme
that goes way back. And then the Christians thought, hey, let's take that theme and use that too for the birth of the Christ. But it really is the Christ consciousness and the Christ light. Again, there's the theme of light.
Exactly. And, if you look at like when did Christ become part of Christmas, there was like Christmas before Christ, which was Yule and the solstice. And when did it become Christianized? it really was around, monarchies and kings themselves adopting Christianity. And then, through imperialism, whether it was the Vikings conquering or other types of colonization, it was easier to unite people and lands under one God. But like they did with most traditions, they let them keep most of the pagan rites and rituals and
Right.
traditions and then changed the marketing and the branding depending on, what worked for them politically.
That's why things like the Christmas tree, which had its roots, its pagan roots,
Yeah.
the Yule log and the bonfires, and even as I mentioned earlier, the solstice shaman, Santa Claus came into
Yes.
play, but in the different traditions they had different names for that being.
Sure. And old Saint Nicholas came into play, during Christian times, but Germany had an older, scarier version of Santa Claus
The
and
Krampus?
yes, to scare the children. And, there were all these different traditions, but people don't realize, especially in Western culture, and I'm not a Debbie Downer here. You got to understand. I listen to Christmas music on my way over here. I love Christmas. I celebrate it with my kids, but I also know like the psychology behind like Western commercialism and advertising. And also I have my perspective understanding the roots of Christmas. The Christmas we know it was carefully branded to be more secular and also to be commercial and commercialized.
Right, right. And I think just like we did our Halloween special, our
Sure.
Samhain special, I think it was like in the US at least the 1950s
Absolutely.
with the advent of television
Yes.
that it was like let's make this a commercial holiday.
Right.
And with Halloween, candy suppliers were so psyched, and
Yes.
with Christmas, any kind of gifts
Right.
were the focus, and not the spiritual aspect. It was more the commercial aspect, and make sure you get all your presents for everybody under the tree. And that's when I think the pressure began.
Yes. And actually, I took in grad school, I took an advertising course, and we spent a whole section on the psychology behind advertising and post World War II advertising, really focusing on the nostalgia of holiday traditions and Americana. And actually, I didn't know this till I took this class. Our current depiction of Santa Claus, cherubic, round face, fluffy white beard, red suit, our current idea of Santa Claus was carefully branded by Coca-Cola. And if you look at it, the early Coca-Cola advertising in the 50s was all about Santa Claus. And it was like all that same red, the Coca-Cola red, the same Coca-Cola red in his costume. But if you Google it, Coca-Cola specifically really focused on the Christmas advertising, and their depiction of Santa stuck.
So he got chubby from drinking too much sugar.
Yes, exactly.
Sugar-filled original formula Coca-Cola.
Right,
and
right.
he bloated out from what he was depicted in
Right.
places like Europe and Scandinavia as a thinner Kris Kringle.
It's scarier too.
Scarier.
Yeah. And I mean, it's the same idea like the diamond became the, marriage stone through modern advertising. Before this, past century, other stones were chosen, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, but it was De Beers diamonds, post-World War advertising that made people embrace the diamond as the engagement ring. So,
And interesting, in Vedic astrology, half the population would do okay with diamonds and the other half would do okay with yellow sapphires because of their chart rulers. Like yellow sapphire is considered in Vedic astrology a very viable love ring or marriage ring, and diamond would go to the other half of the population. But instead, everybody sold the expensive one, diamonds.
right.
My guest is Sarah Adams, talking about the traditions of Yule and the solstice. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about making the solstice your own for our current times and how we can harness the light and work with this energy of the earth and the sun that is available at this time of year and all year round. So stay tuned. Are you interested in natural health and regenerative healing? Do you want to work with vibration to heal your body? Check out this patented wearable light technology at www.lifewave.com/JillJar. LifeWave is a company that has patches that you wear. So it's not transdermal, you're not taking anything in. And what these patches do, they activate your body's light. It's called biomodulation. And that light is activated, your body starts producing GHK, copper peptides, which in turn activates stem cell production. That's right. So wearing these patches will regenerate your body, reflects your body's light back into your tissues, and you become more vital, energized, reduce pain, inflammation, improvement of sleep, increased strength are all possibilities. Other benefits could be hair quality, rapid wound healing, mental clarity, increased joy and stamina, your skin appearance and wrinkles could go away. Again, all probable and possible depending on your chemistry. Others have enjoyed increased sports performance and recovery and restored muscle or skeletal conditions. Check it out at lifewave.com/JillJar and order yours today. Welcome back. My guest is Sarah Adams. Sarah, you have so much to tell us about Yule and winter solstice. Let's hear it.
Hi, Jill. Yes, I'm so happy again to be here to talk about the solstice and Yule. And we'll just wrap up talking a little more about the traditions, and then we can review how we can use these ancient themes and rituals and concepts to center ourselves in these modern times. Because guess what? We still have cold and darkness here in the northern hemisphere in the winter.
That's
and
right.
The sun still shifts us into the winter solstice when it goes into Capricorn. So thousands and thousands of years have passed, but that part hasn't changed. It's old cycles with new themes.
And now we get to have SAD, seasonal affective disorder, when we have those months of dark and our thyroid's shut down. So let's hear about the positive outlook, Sarah.
Well, I will say, to look on the bright side, no pun intended, in these modern times, we do have things like vitamin D gummies, which I
Woohoo!
use. I know, I use
And
those.
vitamin D lamps.
Yes, I use those for myself and my children to combat seasonal affective disorder.
Or just go down to Florida or Arizona where the sun always shines.
Exactly. But in ancient times, they used the merriment and the celebrations and the feastings not just for spiritual observance, but also literally to lift their spirits in these dark times. So we can still relate to that as we drink hot cocoa and drive around and look for Christmas lights and go to the Christmas Carol productions or the Nutcracker, or just seeing family Christmas parties, exchanging gifts. It's like wherever we can, we try to find that joy. And, these ancient celebrations around celebrating light, again, we've seen them for thousands of years. And I talked about Nordic and Germanic culture celebrations. We also can see this. We talked about it go as far back as ancient Egypt, Ra, the sun god, returning and bringing light. But even Hanukkah, with the brightly lit candles of the menorah. Kwanzaa celebrations are big around candles. So whether we're in ancient or modern times, sometimes in the middle of winter, we just need a little light. I will close the historical part by just sharing the Celtic legend of the Holly King. So the Holly King was the symbol of darkness and longer nights, and he was old, kind of like Santa Claus.
Saturn.
Yes, Saturn. And Father Time, Kronos,
Saturn.
the Lord of Karma. And he would battle with the younger Oak King. And the Celts believed that the Oak King, the youthful young king, was bringing in the light of the new year. So it's just that idea, we live in a planet duality. It's the focus on the duality between dark and light. In times of famine, in times when ancient cultures and modern cultures are like fear freezing to death. I mean, that's still a modern concern with homelessness and those who don't have shelter. So it's the idea of, in these dark times, which can be really sad, holidays can be sad for people, where can we find a little light? And how can we celebrate Yule and winter solstice in this new age and in these modern times? We can have a Yule log. Most of us have Christmas trees. We can celebrate caroling and wassailing. Also, decorating our homes with greens and evergreens. And, one ritual, and it's actually pretty practical, that I noted from a book. It's called Circle Round by Starhawk. And it is about bringing traditions and holidays of the goddess and feminine divine, celebrating Mother Earth, bringing that into your modern home, and even acknowledging these old ways with family. So, one way to do is simply clean house before the winter solstice. It's something that everybody in the house can participate in. And as you're cleaning, and you want to make sure to like sweep the corners, under the rugs, shake out anything. And then as you do that, as you empty the dustpan, as you throw out the vacuum cleaner bag, you can name some things you're getting rid of as you're cleaning. My practice, my kind of modern pagan practice, would then be to smudge my house. I'd walk around with white sage counterclockwise, remove the energy, and then I'd walk around clockwise with a candle or incense or something to go around clockwise and bless and seal the space. Then, for the holiday season, you can, once you've cleaned the house, then put up your Christmas decorations, then put up your evergreens. And another thing you can do to celebrate Yule and solstice in an old school traditional way is to have a simmer pot. So you've cleaned the house, maybe you've saged, you've put up some greenery, the Christmas tree, the Christmas decorations. You can do a simmer pot. It could be orange and clove and cinnamon, as I plan to do in my home. Or you can do rosemary and bay leaves, is what pagans and witches would do in old times, and simmer them in hot water, and then they would actually then use it to wash their floors.
Wow.
But it's the idea of inner cleansing during the winter solstice, because it's a time. What is the darkness? What opportunity does that bring? In the barren darkness, we can die to the past, we can let go of the old, we can release, and then we have that clean slate to visualize what we want to bring in as we focus on the light returning and as we focus on the new year. So I would say a great way to wrap up that ritual, what I would do, I would then light a candle with a prayer in it, and put your intent for what you want to let go of and what you want to bring in for the new year.
Right. The theme is death and rebirth, as symbolized by that ancient Celtic myth of the Holly King, symbolizing the old or what's dying, and the rebirth through the Oak King. So we're all still working with these archetypes, even in our modern society and in our modern life.
Right.
The death of the old and the ringing in of the new. And the solstice is the ancient marker of that, around which all these other festivals such as Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Yuletide have evolved into our modern times.
And what's beautiful about the winter solstice and Yuletide specifically, the ancients didn't necessarily know the astronomical science behind the holiday, yet they intuitively did. They were naturally, innately connected to the cycles of the seasons, the sun, the moon, the planet. in a way that we've become disconnected from. And we can understand it now. Like in modern times, we know from an intellectualized standpoint that there's science behind the solstice. In the northern hemisphere, the Earth's axis tilts away from the sun. The sun reaches its farthest distance from the equatorial plane, and that's what brings us winter, this cold season. And that is still reflected, like we see that reflected in all kinds of holiday celebrations, even in the music. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. I mean, that comes from the idea that the archetypal ideal Christmas is a snowy, cold Christmas.
Right.
So that theme has been around since the dawn of time. Like, these cold, wintry times. Oh, let's put up lights. Let's celebrate. Let's feast. Let's give gifts. Let's stay warm. And finding that inner warmth, like within ourselves and through celebration with each other. And these festivals of light around the world in spanning centuries were really all to celebrate that the sun would return in this time of darkness. And I just think it's a beautiful time as an astrologer every year when we kick off Sagittarius season. I know the sun goes into Sagittarius, we start the celebrations, and then the sun goes into Capricorn, and it's okay, we have the darkest day of the year, but then the days are going to get longer and brighter from here on out.
Right. And then we get that big boost up in modern society with the daylight savings time. So by March, it's light again at
Yes.
7 o'clock at night here in New England. And that return of the light does go a long way with our DNA and our feel good factor. And in the United States, there's half of the United States does, well, the southern part of the United States still has that light. But a lot of these festivals people need to know, especially if they're living in Australia, New Zealand, or in the southern hemisphere. We're getting all this information and sort of this content from the traditional European, Scandinavic, Nordic traditions, which did experience those long nights
Right.
and short days. So it's in the psyche of humanity, especially in the United States, where many, many of the immigrants had come from those areas and brought those traditions. Sarah, so in closing, do you have some information to share that would inspire our listeners as we go into this sacred solstice season?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'd like to emphasize as we talk about themes of light and darkness, uh, darkness is not something to fear. I think deep in our collective subconscious of humanity, we always equate light and dark with certain judgmental attachments. But, the old cultures and societies, they just looked at it as like cycles and themes. So, we need every night is followed by a day. And we actually need darkness. It's when we reset, it's when we regenerate, it's when we sleep. We use darkness to recharge and wake back up for every new day. Babies are seeds from that come from the darkness of their mother's womb. So, cultures understood that in times of darkness, we go in and find our own merriment. If it's not warm outside, we have a bonfire. So it was actually a real tenacious go-getter attitude. It was about survivalism, but it was also about fortification of the human spirit. And I think that we can all fortify ourselves during the Christmas season. And, think about now when you're celebrating about the wheel of the year. This is the wrapping up of the wheel of the year. And the sun symbolically dies, but then light is reborn when the sun is rebirthed from the womb of the goddess. And we can use that symbolism in our own life. The same principles still apply. Just as thousands of years ago when the sun went into Capricorn, it was the shortest day and longest night. It will still be like that, thousands of years from now. These cycles repeat themselves. And one theme that is the same now as it was in ancient times is that the veil between worlds is thinner at this time on a solstice. Higher vibrational energies and information sources are available. For anybody who does psychic work, for anybody who's empathic, intuitive, pay attention to your dreams, but also, small miracles during waking hours. And remember, synchronicity is real. So, whatever spirituality means to you, it could be thinking of loved ones during the holidays and then seeing cardinals, typically the spirit bird of a loved one who's gone. And, there are small ways that we can honor the spiritual side of the winter solstice and Yule while we're celebrating a traditional Christmas. As you're decorating the Christmas tree, remember the pagan roots it came from. Maybe you can decorate your Christmas tree with cardinals to remember the spirits of your loved ones. Maybe light them a candle. Maybe animals from whatever cultural heritage you come from on the Christmas tree. A traditional Yule animal was the reindeer, which we know that was passed on and celebrated and is still seen in imagery all around, Santa Claus and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but that was actually a Nordic tradition. So whatever you choose, however you honor Christmas and however you observe winter solstice and Yuletide, just know it's a threshold and you're stepping through a gateway from the past year, moving towards the next year. Choose a higher vibrational existence for yourself rather than any suffering of the past. Anger and fear is something we can all rise above, and basically embrace light and joy to break free and embrace our own personal power. And sometimes that is the power just to be happy, the power to give yourself permission to smile and laugh and feel joy even when life can be intense and demanding and busy during the holidays.
Thank you so much. My guest has been Sarah Adams. Check her out and see about getting a reading from her for the new year. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Jill. May we all manifest our long-term goals via disciplined action as the sun goes into Capricorn for this winter solstice.
Yeehaw. It's a great time to book a reading. So check out my website, JillJardineAstrology.com/shop and pick the kind of reading or service you would like. I hope you enjoyed this episode on Yuletide and the Winter Solstice featuring Sarah Adams. Make sure you download, share, subscribe, and give us a 5-star review. This is Cosmic Scene with Jill Jardine signing out, sending healing holiday vibrations and wassailing through the quantum field. Stop!